Hi, y'all. Welcome to Cocktail Classified. I'm very excited to launch our first episode today, official episode, I should say, with Mr. Dale DeGroff and Ted Breaux. Welcome in. So we're going to get started. So if y'all want to introduce yourselves, because I know most people will know Dale, but other viewers who might not know who Dale is and Ted, if you guys want to give us a quick intro.
Well, let's see. Research scientist originally from New Orleans. My professional career was derailed by a spirit known as absinthe that I've been studying since the end of 1993. So it's been quite a while at this point. Basically, I guess my claim to infamy would be 2000. I was the first person to analyze samples of antique absinthe, and that really provided the basis of what we needed to get the longest standing ban on absinthe in the world, which is the U.S.
Yeah.
Banned for 95 years. We got that overturned in 2007, launched Lucid Absinthe Superior, and then I brought in Melcher Premiums at that point, and basically I've been an advocate for truth and transparency in absinthe and other spirits as well, and I've collaborated with this gentleman here who has quite the track record.
Yeah.
I'm Dale DeGroff, and I left university to go to New York City to be an actor, and I did plays until I could find a good bartending job.
Yeah. And then, yeah.
Got lucky. I had the gift of gab and ran into a genius named Joseph Baum, who became my mentor and put me on a right road.
That's awesome. Cool. Let's start a little bit about history. So I know you kind of re-triggered what is modern mixology. Can you kind of talk about I'm kind of curious what the landscape was when you first got into bartending versus where it is now.
Bars were cool. I mean, bars were the place to be. I went to New York City, and the New York City Bar and Grill was like worldwide famous, of course. The American bar here, the New York bar there, and so it took me about 30 seconds to realize that life took place in the bars, and so that's where I went. We had these tiny little apartments, and nobody stayed in their apartments, so most people came to New York who weren't native to New York because they wanted to get away from their family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no, I mean, you know what I mean. They wanted to get out there, at least. Some of them wanted to get away from their family. So you found your new extended family in the neighborhood bars, and, people would ask me, what's your favorite bar? And I'd say, give me a neighborhood. It's like that. It really is.
Yeah.
And then I ran into, I roomed with my best friend from, I didn't really live anywhere all my life because my dad was a Navy pilot, but I had a good friend up in New England in the town where my mom was born named Jerry Holland. His dad was a hot shit New York City advertising guy, and he had a company called Lewis Holland and Callaway. George Lois, a famous art director. And they had Restaurant Associates account. And I'm sure that when Jerry and I ended up in New York, he came in 70, I went in 69. I'm willing to bet that his mother, Alice, called up and said, Ronnie, you give those boys a job. Right? Because he did. Me in the mailroom and Jerry making shelves or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But in the mailroom, I had a lot of downtime, and files were there, the archives, and the archives for Restaurant Associates went back to the beginning. So, the Newarker, La Fonda del Sol, 1960, the Four Seasons, 1959. I'm going through all these menus. I mean, had no clue about what I was looking at, really, but I did remember. And then because we were family, we ended up at table with Joe Baum, the impresario himself, who was an extraordinary guy. And fast forward, I do get behind the bar at one of Joe's places, a glorified Irish bar in Rockefeller Center called Charlie O's. And I go to the West Coast. I end up at the Hotel Bel Air. I just got such lucky jobs. I mean, literally jobs that I just lucked into. I did not have the skill to be a bartender in one of the top 10 hotels in the world at the time, the Hotel Bel Air. Okay. But they fired the day guy, and there were no HR departments then. So I walked into the bar, and the executive bartender, looking like a substitute teacher, because that's exactly what he did not want to be there. Yeah. So when I said, I hear you need a day man, I could see he was about to say, well, go. And then he didn't stop himself. He said, okay, where did you work? And I said, Charlie O's in New York City in Rockefeller Center, and you'd heard of it. Come on behind the bar, blah, blah, blah. I got the job, and then I taught myself what was behind the bar, because 2/3 of it I didn't know. You got the day job, you got a lot of time off, taste, read the labels.
Read the bottles.
Read the bottles. But when I went back to New York with 2 young sons in tow and my wife, we were going to go to Berkeley and open a bar restaurant with some friends of ours in Emeryville, but things didn't work out because I couldn't get a job up there. So I went there, and I heard that Joe Baum was opening a fine dining French restaurant looking for a head bartender. And I went for it. I worked for a little while there, and then I accidentally found out that he was restoring the Rainbow Room, and I got that gig. That was the story. Benny Goodman was sitting at my bar
Oh, okay.
at the French place,
Yeah.
And I said to the wine master, who was one of the guys who interviewed me, Ray Wellington, a wonderful character, he was one of the cellar rats from Windows on the World. I said, Ray, what the hell is going on? I mean, Kevin Disraeli, Dale Chilhooly with Joe the other day, and I got Benny Goodman waiting for Joe at the bar. What the hell's going on? He said, it's the Rainbow Room thing, man. I said, what Rainbow Room thing? Because Joe had asked me to do this classic cocktail menu for this little fine dining French restaurant, which totally confused the shit out of me. And I found out that that's what I was doing. I was a cellar. I was a lab rat doing recipes that he could possibly use over there. So I wanted the gig, and I approached him and eventually got it.
That's awesome. And what resources did you use for recipes? 'Cause I know back then you
There's
didn't
a
really
story
have
there.
money.
There's a doozy in there.
Oh, okay.
So in the interview with Joe, finally, I went through 2 interviews and got to Joe. He said, I want a classic pre-prohibition cocktail menu. Pick up a book by Jerry Thomas called How to Mix Drinks. You'll get some ideas of where I want to go with it. And I want you to tell stories, because he knew that I worked at the ad agency and I knew a lot of stories, right? And most importantly, tell stories. But I want this menu, so
Get this book.
get this book. So I went over to Fifth Avenue. I went to Doubledays. And then I went to Barnes & Noble. Nobody ever heard of the book. And I'm like, this is impossible. Joe's a smart guy. So the Scribner's was still open, and that was the bookstore on Fifth Avenue. So I went to Scribner's, and there was a guy said, let me go to the old and rare. And he pulls it out, and he goes, you're not going to find this book. It was written in 1862.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay.
Of course, Joe could have told you that,
yeah.
but
He could have.
he left it to you to find out. If he can figure this out, then he's worth hiring.
Yeah. Well, that's my story in a nutshell, and I just got lucky.
Yeah.
Lucky with jobs, and I had the gift of the gab.
Yeah, that's definitely important as a bartender, is being able to connect with the guests and tell stories and talk. Yeah, for sure. And Ted, what got you into absinthe?
Well, the funny thing is late 80s. I mean, I was bartending at that time too, but this was the dark ages. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And we were, we had this invention called the juice gun, which was arguably, more destructive than a neutron bomb.
Okay.
Yeah, terrible times. But actually, it's those days, reading bottles and, trying to figure out what single malt meant. You couldn't Google back then. Yeah, it wasn't happening. Yeah, so being from New Orleans, several things happened inside of a week. I walked down the street and took note of the old Absinthe House, a bar that's been there since 1874, right? And and that same week, I got something in the mail said alternative books catalog, how to grow opium, poppies, that sort of thing. One of them was Absinthe: History in a Bottle by Barnaby Conrad.
Okay.
And my colleague mentioned, I was like, well, it's this word suddenly appearing everywhere. I want to know what this stuff was. My colleague, brilliant chemist, said, oh, absinthe, is that green liquor that made people crazy. It's like, okay, well, we analyze things for a living, so what was in it made people crazy? Oh, I don't know. So, I got Barnaby Conrad's book and read it like 3 times inside of a week, and I actually had to send him a letter. Remember when people wrote those things?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like ask
letters.
Yeah, so, well, this is a great book, but I have some questions. And he wrote back, said, those are great questions, but everything I know is in the book. So, so that started me off on this, being that I analyzed, I would analyze water samples and find out what the contamination was, that sort of thing. It's like I wanted to know what was in this. And it was in my Merck Index, which is a book. It's like the unabridged dictionary of chemistry. Every chemist has a copy.
Yep.
I had the Centennial edition, and it said absinthe. It said drinking absinthe can cause tremors, convulsions, death.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I said. I was
yeah.
man, I've got to know. What is this? What was in this stuff? The thing is, if you want to study absinthe, you have to have absinthe to study it. And there was none around. And thus became my, research for research purposes only, distillation experiments, and that all began. funny story. Sometime in the later in the 90s, I met this guy through this medium called Yahoo News Groups. Okay, something that existed back then, and people chatted about
That
different
antique
topics.
thing?
And then this guy, he had reached out to me via email and said, "Hey, I've got a friend that has a terminal illness, and I would love for him to be able to taste absinthe before he. Do you think you can send me a sample of what you've done?" I said, "Sure." And that guy turned out to be Gary Regan.
Okay. We
Yeah.
have his book right there.
Yeah. So that was So basically, Gary was like the first person from the cocktail world that I met by a very oblique avenue. So at this point, I'm still a research scientist, and in 1996, I just antique full unopened bottles of antique absinthe basically fell out of the sky into my lab from two different directions. It's almost like they found me, and and then as I tell people, at that point in time, I drew samples and I became a member of a very lonely, restricted club of people who had tasted vintage absinthe and were alive to talk about it.
Yeah.
And and then so in 2000, I started this whole analysis, looking for the problem ingredient, and I found nothing.
Nothing was wrong.
Nothing was wrong with them, and that began a paradigm shift in my own thinking. And later, I would co-author a couple of studies with some researchers in Europe on the composition of vintage absinthe, and it really put forth the proper basis to make the wrongs right. And so as I mentioned, we got that fixed, but not after a very lengthy dialogue with USTTV. That went on for a long time, and the problem was never really. I mean, I thought I was going to have this big scientific discussion, and it turned out that was the easy part.
Okay.
We're like, oh no, as far as the liquid being is not a problem, and probably never. We agree. Oh wow, okay. So what's the issue? It's perception.
Okay.
Yeah, because at that time, back in the 90s, I had a colleague from the Czech Republic, who had brought me a bottle. He knew I was interested in absinthe, and he came to the U.S. and brought me a bottle of absinthe, and it was this blue-green liquid that tasted like vodka with something really weird added to it. And I was like, I don't know what this stuff is. I mean, I know it says absinthe on the label, but that was my first realization that this topic is a minefield.
Was that the early Czech bottle that they brought you?
Yeah, I mean, this was like, and I think it
neon
had some
green.
Neon green.
Yeah, it looked like Listerine mouthwash. It's that sort of bluish tinted green. And I think eventually that color had to be changed because it was made illegal by the European Union. But this is the problem, and this is the problem that has existed through history, is that you've been able to profiteers been able to put anything in a bottle and call it absinthe. Flavored vodka, green dye, put a label on it that promises hallucinations.
Yeah.
And this is what happens. And then you create interest in the category and you kill it at the same time. And it's that sort of rubbish that really inspired me so in 2001, I started traveling around France looking for a distillery that might have some, absinthe distilling equipment that was still around. And, I went to all these pasties houses and they don't distill anything. No, they don't have stills.
Okay.
And this is a problem because, for me, Dale and I, we talk about this constantly in our presentations and our discussion groups with bartenders. And, if you want to make classic cocktails, you really need ingredients that tasted like the ingredients that were around when they were created. Yeah. Because
so the pasties guys were just rectifiers?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, no, none of this stuff. That's what I'm saying. None of this stuff. There's been, and it's one shortcut after another over a century, in some cases or more, and it's just gradually changed the product. The product has morphed into something that wasn't what it was when it was created.
Yeah.
And this happens with so many things. And one of the things that Dale and I have been very, very fortunate and privileged to be in certain places, at certain times with certain people, where we might have the opportunity to taste something. It's like I tell people, tasted Old Tom Gin from the 1880s, Jamaican rum from the 1880s, pre-Fox. Anyways, but, what's in those bottles is truth, right? Everything else is just marketing.
Right.
So this played into what I was, because I knew what vintage absinthe was like, and I couldn't buy it anywhere. Okay. So that is what really drove me to go and spend all my vacation time. At that time, I was still working as a scientist, just wandering around Europe, wandering around France mostly, and looking for a place where I could take all this information that I had obtained and reverse engineer to reproduce, original products using the original materials, original base spirits, botanicals from the original regions. That was my mission. It seems a bit crazy, but ultimately made it happen.
Yeah. Changed the law here in the U.S. and made it legal for it to come through.
Well, it's one thing I point out is, you go back to every cocktail book, imagine down to the one that Dale had to round up for his job.
Yeah.
Published, and every one thereafter, and absinthe is in it. And you pick up a cocktail book from 1900, nowhere in it do you see vodka or tequila, but you see absinthe in it.
Yeah.
It was an indelible part of, the cocktail culture that,
19th century mixology.
Yeah,
It was
it
huge
was-
in 19th
it was huge.
Yeah.
And by, and really the pinnacle, the Savoy cocktail book, first published 1930 by Harry Craddock, American bartender working in London at the American Bar. And, it's, and when there are dozens and dozens of cocktails in that book that call for absinthe. And when there's none around, well, what does that do? And you don't have anything reasonable. Jam Legendre created Herb Saint in 1933. That was intended to be something that replicated that flavor profile to make cocktails, especially cocktails that were New Orleans centric, possible, because there wasn't anything around. So it's just a very sordid history, and naturally, it's all wrapped up in politics and economics and competition, and it's really messy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it took years to sort through all that. And fortunately, I wasn't the only one that had an interest.
Yeah. There was other parties that were also interested in trying to get
Welcome to the beauty of the internet. There were
Yeah.
other weird people out there that were interested in the same thing. So and that helped as well.
Okay.
So
You
That's
reminded me of a
totally-
story when you talked about Barnaby Conrad III. His next book was called The Martini,
yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
and we had the release at the Rainbow Room. So
Oh,
we came
really?
behind the
Okay.
bar.
That's cool.
So on the way up to it, the PR lady from the Rainbow Room called me up. She said, "Jeannie Most from CNN wants to come up there and find out if the cocktail is really back. Do you mind if she comes to this event tonight?" I said, "I don't care." So Jeannie Most, do you remember Jeannie Most? So on CNN, in the early days of CNN, she did little spots that filled. There were a lot of holes in those days because
Okay.
they didn't get a lot of advertising at
Right,
first. you know.
Yeah.
right.
So Jeannie Most's things would play several times throughout the day or throughout the week, and if it was interesting, even longer maybe. And they were just lifestyle stuff. She was character. She was a serious character, and everybody loved her. And so she came up and she's interviewing everybody at the bar, and talking to Barnaby about is the cocktail back and all this stuff. And within 86 hours, every single copy of Barnaby's book was sold.
Oh,
It was
okay.
a Chronicle publishing company that was owned by the
Chronicle
San
Books
Francisco.
by the San Francisco Chronicle. Yeah.
Okay.
So he calls his publisher and says, oh my God, we got to get some books out there, It's just amazing, And they said, yeah. Well, we print in China, and we're looking at about 8 to 10 weeks.
Oh, okay.
And
Boy,
and it
it's
was old
frustrating.
news by the time he got
You're
there.
right,
Yeah.
right.
He could have sold, 100,000 copies. It was just the saddest moment.
Yeah.
He was a character.
Barnaby Conrad III, he has to be commended. When I read that book, which I did, I read it again recently, Absinthe History in a Bottle, which was published in
great book.
1988.
Okay.
It's, without the benefit of the internet, no Google, no Wikipedia, no nothing. What he did and the accuracy of information,
Absolutely.
relative to the time, it was absolutely incredible.
Now,
what he did.
his dad was a bar owner in San Francisco. He had the Matador.
Okay.
His dad was an American bullfighter and fought
Okay.
76 bulls in
And
Spain.
lived.
And lived.
Wow.
And
Okay.
he was a real character. And every movie star in Hollywood hung out at the Matador in San Francisco. And I'm sure that his dad had massive amounts of information about all this stuff, too.
Yeah.
But Barnaby's book had every depiction from every major artist in the 19th century and early 20th century of the absinthe drinker, and then some. He had so much beautiful art, and he is a fine artist.
Yeah.
Barnaby, by the way, besides being a writer.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, some of his work was in the Martini. and it was just marvelous stuff. He was just and then a bar owner. He partnered in a bar in San Francisco as well.
That's cool. So we talked a little bit about Gaz Reagan. Did you ever run into him during your time there in New York? I'm
Gaz?
sure. Yeah, I'm sure he was.
We were
cross
judges
paths.
together, world class, running around the
Yeah.
world together. No, we were old friends from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I met him when he was working down at the waterfront, in the early days. I wish I'd met him when he was working at Drake's Drum, which was apparently a really cool place.
Yeah.
But I hadn't run across him then. But no, Gaz was one of the people in this industry who was responsible for creating the kind of community that exists in this profession now, which never existed ever before that I know of. There were attempts in the 19th century for bartenders to get together in a guild and stuff like that, and they tried it. And the USBG, 1930s, it had a big following in Europe. There was one chapter out there in L.A. in the United States, and they were just playing golf, and until the young new generation in the new millennium glommed onto it and started opening chapters all around the country.
Yeah.
But Gaz, when he had his cancer and he came out the other side, he was a changed guy, and he started traveling to festivals and wherever anybody would invite him to talk about mindful bartending. And his thought was, bartenders can change the world one customer at a time.
Yeah.
And he and Vlad, the guy from Bratislava, I don't know, Vladimir? He's an amazing bartender. Traveled together because he also has this approach to bartending.
Okay.
So Gaz, would tell stories about his dad, who was a public houses all through all his childhood. That's where he grew up, in public houses. But the wonderful story that he told was about this customer in the small town where his dad had a pub, and there was a really rough, tough guy who no one wanted in their bar, and when he would go into a bar, people would leave, But he also, on the other side of his character, he had a beautiful tenor voice, this guy. And when he walked into Gaz's dad's place, he said to the other people, if he walks into my place, I'm going to take care of him. You guys just step back, And I'm trying to remember his name as I tell the story, because it was a really interesting name, like Brutus or something like that. But when he walked in, Gaz's dad went over and said, "What can I get you?" And poured him a pint and chatted and says, "I'm glad to see you in here." And after the second pint, he went up to him and he said, and they always had music. His dad always had music.
Okay.
He said, "We'd be honored if you'd sing Danny Boy."
Okay.
And so that was the only place where he ever felt comfortable. And what Gaz's father said to him was, "Yeah, he was afraid." And he said, "Afraid of what?" He said, "He was afraid that people wouldn't respect him." And I gave him respect, and he gave us love with Danny Boy. It's a wonderful story.
Yeah. That's awesome. I know you hit on the point of how collaboration and stuff has changed from when it was before, and I think that's definitely a big thing in this industry nowadays, especially when you start talking about like Tales of the Cocktail, like Speed Rack, PDX, and how all these people just get together and it's just everybody kind of connecting and networking.
It's all about people.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they share information. In the old days, like in the days of the only interesting mixology between the two wars, because Prohibition had just devastated our industry, was tiki. I mean, it wasn't called tiki in the beginning when Victor Bergeron was doing it and Don the Beachcomber was doing it. These guys were top secret. I mean, Don the Beachcomber had numbers on the bottles. They didn't want anybody to know because you didn't want people
copying.
So and that environment is totally the opposite now. People share everything. They share recipes. There is, for the first time ever, education. The only education in the 19th century was the master teaches the apprentice. It was a master apprentice kind of a situation. That did not exist after Prohibition in any. And not only that. I mean, what parent is going to want their child to go into a gangster profession? And until the generations of gangsters, who, by the way, went legit after Prohibition and still owned the places and
Yeah.
distributed. We have the 3-tier system
They're
because of the
distributors.
gangsters.
So the gangster, yeah.
Yeah,
They were experienced for distribution.
exactly.
Yeah.
So what parent, until those guys, those generations passed on and the profession started to recover, probably with my generation, I think if I did anything in my high profile position, it was to make it okay to be a bartender again.
Yeah.
Not only okay, but maybe a profession,
Yeah, you brought the professional bartender moniker out.
And I had a tremendous amount of respect, and I owe a great debt of gratitude to Joe for that, because Joe pushed me to an area where I probably wouldn't have gone on my own.
I think that's a cool story too, because I think a lot of this is about mentorship, especially
There you
bartending.
go.
You have that one person that kind of pushes you to do what you don't feel comfortable for, and then the rest is kind of history. Did you have any mentors, Ted, that kind of pushed you in that direction?
No, I really didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, this was, the thing about me is that I've always had like this sort of, I have my own circus in my head, and my mentor was just tenacity. It's like I want something, I'm gonna have it.
Yeah.
I'll find
We
a
can
way.
get your doctor for that circus in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's medication for that.
Yeah.
No, but yeah. So I there's a side for me that about me that I really didn't reckon with, until relatively late, and that is basically I tend to be an introvert. I'm a social introvert, but I always have this thing going on, in my head, and I'm very self-driven. I mean, I've had people in my life, adults, and people that were associates that I really respected, and I can say that in some ways they maybe inspired me, or in ways that, hey, the things that your interest in, the things you think about. This is good.
Yeah.
This plays into your growth. And for me, it was more like intellectual growth. Where socially, in some ways, I guess it's amazing, because when I was a bartender, and I was in a high volume environment, and I was a star tender. I was at the highest sales, and I could sling drinks, and I was good with problem people and whatever. And it's like, in a way that helped develop my people skills, because before that, I think I was really quite awkward.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know. I'm sort of a ball of. I'm like a slinky, those things,
slinky,
and when it gets tangled, and it's a mess. Yeah, it's always been kind of that way.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm kind of similar in that aspect. I didn't really have a mentor either. I just kind of dove into the books, read your book, and just started reading a bunch of books and asking suppliers when they come in a bunch of questions. That's
Great. I'm glad. I'm glad I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the same way.
It's very cool seeing how the education is now compared to when I first started bartending too, like 10, 12 years ago now, and seeing how much it's developed. And even some of the younger bartenders I work with for Not Too Sweet, and just with the clients I work with, it's for the consulting side. I'm seeing like they know a lot of stuff already. I'm like, okay, this is great. We have a good baseline here, and I don't have to sit and go back from where I started to where I'm at now.
But this is fun. I mean, it's, and I tell people when I give master classes, whatever, so 85% of what I do is education. 15% distillation, 85% education. Really is about that.
Yeah.
And it's part of what keeps this wonderful art, of craft cocktails afloat, is education.
Yeah.
And having a critical mass of people with a desire to learn it.
Yeah.
And it elevates the whole profession. It legitimizes the profession.
Yeah.
So I'm not just a bartender. I mean, I'm well versed in craft and classic cocktails.
Yeah.
Amen.
We've been
Great.
talking a
For
lot
sure.
about the last couple of days in Dallas and Houston about exactly that. And in the mid-'90s, Doug Frost, who is a master of wine and a master sommelier, which is pretty amazing, and Steve Olson, who's an agave expert, among other things, who opened several bars back in the day, worked with Bobby Flay in the beginning on his first bar. Steve and Doug had a really interesting gig with the Seagram's Company when it was the biggest spirits company in the world.
Yeah.
And they were the cocktail and spirits education arm of the Seagram's company, and they went around. And I was at the Rainbow Room at the time, and I heard about these guys, and I went and took their class.
Mm.
And what we did was we tasted. Isn't that a unique idea?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I thought only wine guys and restaurant guys tasted. You
Yeah.
know, in that era, if you asked a bartender to describe some of the flavors that he had behind him on the bar, he'd be like, "What?" Because nobody ever thought to even think of this as a culinary art or skill,
Yeah.
craft anymore since Prohibition.
Right.
Obviously. So no one bothered to learn how to taste. So bartenders would be like, "Yeah, I hear all these words getting thrown around and everything. Come on, that's not for me." And Doug would counter. He'd say, "Really? Oh, so you mean if you go to the gym, you're going to run over and pick up 200 pounds and throw it over your head? No. You're going to get on a Cybex machine, then you're going to lift 50, and then you're going to lift 75, and then you. So if you're not getting thrown out of the spice department of Whole Foods, you're not working hard enough on your tasting skills.
Yeah.
Make your library first and then tell me that you can't. You know, everybody has the equipment. Just get the library up here in your head of aromas, flavors, and tastes, and then you'll be a good taster. And that's what we taught, you know.
It's the only way you develop perspective. But it took someone from the wine world
Yes.
to do that.
And that's what Stephen Doug. And then when Seagram's exploded with that crazy guy who's destroyed the most amazing company in the world. I can't believe he did that. Wanted to get into show business. One of the junior Seagram, Brompman, heir to the fortune. Anyway, when that all happened, and all these other liquor companies were invented, the Seagram's Spirits and Schools. So we're all sitting around in San Francisco one day. We were part of a competition. You know, Andy Bluth, God rest his soul, Andy, we lost Andy, had this wonderful competition in San Francisco, which we were all judges in. You know, Doug, Steve, Paul. Andy was there, not as a judge, but in another capacity.
Yeah.
And David was there, and Steve. We're all sitting around. And Paul Packalt and I had been trying to get the Peter Kump School to have a cocktail and spirits for, you know, and they were busy trying to expand into another building, and they didn't have time for us now, but come back to us, they said, you know, so we're kind of frustrated. I did teach at Peter Kump for a while, but one day a month or something, you know. And NYU had a little thing that I taught in a continuing education hotel school thing, but there wasn't much education around. CIA had nothing, by the way. Okay. And so we're sitting around the table just bemoaning, and then we all looked at each other and said, well, here we are. Well, this is the school right here. So the five of us, and then later Andy, decided to create bar, beverage alcohol resource.
Yeah.
And we started with a 5-day master's class, twice a year. Now it's once a year. They're doing it this week right now. And by the way, Paul, Andy, Dave, and I are gone from the company because we all, because we've been nurturing new, younger instructors who look more like the people we're teaching. We got these full 5, 6 old white guys up on the stage, just getting a little embarrassing. And now we have Shannon Mustafer, we have Frankie Marshall, we have so many wonderful, and they're all there now. We have 8 new instructors, and Steve and Doug are up there. So the company will go on, and I hope the CIA will pick it up. The CIA at Hyde Park will pick it up as a they really need it. Oh my God.
Yeah. I almost went to CIA for school.
Oh, no kidding.
Right. I wanted to. So I originally wanted to be a chef, and then I went to kind of got tired of seeing the same people every day. So then I went to front of house, restaurant management, then started learning wine, and then wine led to me being behind a bar.
Nice.
So it's very fun. CIA has a good program, but I do agree that the education on spirits is something that's kind of lacking,
and cocktail,
and even in hospitality
one
programs.
guy, John Fisher, who was with me at the Rainbow Room as the wine master for a while. He's running it. But he can't run everything. He's the wine guy, you know.
UH actually has a big program here that they do spirits tasting.
Yeah,
you guys haven't,
they have a big hospitality program here. Yeah,
it's like the second or third largest in
kidding.
the U.S.
Yeah, I know. I
We
know
went
people
right
that
by
have
the
gone,
university on the way here.
Yeah,
I know people that have gone to UH for that reason, which is how I know that. So yeah, it does. It's well known for that. Yeah,
for sure. Well, kind of another question for y'all. So now we're gonna transition into some cocktail stuff. So we all have our failures in cocktails. Do you guys have any failures in cocktails that you've done? Like you've trying to R&D this cocktail, and you're like, this is horrible. And then you have these really stellar cocktails, like, oh yeah, this is great. What is your kind of process to create a cocktail? And then what are some of the
Well,
cocktails that you're like, got the spin?
interestingly, in my career with Joe, creativity wasn't high on his list of things because Joe was trying to recreate great American classics. You know, he was trying to get back to where we were in the peak of the cocktail, original cocktail golden age, and that was the 1880s through the turn of the century, when there were amazing things happening. So what he wanted was the best recipes we could research and find for what were the lost cocktails. You know, the Between the Sheets, the Sazerac, the Ramos Fizz, the Colony, the Store Club, all these, you know, the Manhattan, the Martini, but those were much more well known. But there were many of them that weren't well known, and he wanted that to happen. So he didn't want Dale DeGroff's tweak on the old fashioned. He wanted the friggin' old fashioned, you know.
Straight
Yeah.
right.
So he wasn't looking for creativity. That came in the next millennium with the generation after me,
Okay.
who took those classics that I brought back at the Rainbow Room and decided that they were going to start making them interesting. But I did, of course, sneak things in toward the end of my tenure at the Rainbow Room, some fun stuff. And then I started making my living. I went to London as the match bar, as the cocktail director for the Match Bar Group, and made menus for them after Dick Bradsell went on to another job. He had had the job first. And that got me thinking, you know, a lot more about creating cocktails. But the first question I think a young bartender should ask himself when he's creating a cocktail is taste your cocktail. And the first question you should ask yourself is, does the world really need this?
Yeah.
You know, the second question I think is, do you have any training in flavor? Have you ever read that flavor Bible over there? Do you understand flavor? You're just winging it because you got familiar with the liquors that are behind you, and you're just going to just throw stuff together and hope for the best.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
get some culinary education. You know, start thinking about, read about, and I think those flavor Bibles that were written by, what are their names again? I have them up. Karen.
Karen Page.
Yeah, and her co-author really were a pretty amazing step forward for bartenders to get a hold of those things and figure out what's what in the. And Dave Arnold has helped us a lot because he's a chef who's teaching about the bar. So don't start cold. You know, as Gaz always said, you can't skip steps in your development any more than a chef could go from making ham and eggs to making a souffle.
Yeah.
You know.
That's very true. There's a lot of bartenders that I know like taking shortcuts, but you can tell very, very quickly in the finished
Because we have
product.
the internet, they
Yep.
think they can read about it, and then they're experts.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for sure.
And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for me. Without having proper craft cocktail training, is for me to do it correctly. But I certainly acknowledge it. The only way you can really make flavors work is you have to understand what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get someone to play a chord, but making music is a whole different animal.
Yes.
And there's certain levels that some people just really won't be. It's you have to make the best of your ability. Some people are just a natural. Some people can naturally write music. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
And putting that together, for me, it's not just about. When I look at a cocktail, I dissect it classically. I need to know what role each ingredient plays in the whole flavor profile, what it contributes, and why it works. But also, my standard is I can get through a glass of anything, but would I order it again?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my standard. Would I drink this a second time?
And your key,
Yeah.
it's key what
Yes.
you just said about choosing your ingredients wisely. A lot of times, young bartenders have so many strong flavored spirits that they like to try to get them all together in one drink, and they end up with mud.
Yes.
Right.
Really strong flavors are the hardest thing in the world to make cocktails with because they're so assertive, each one. And to find 3, let alone 9
That are
strong
complementary.
flavors that are complementary
Yeah.
is a serious task.
Yeah.
So approach it that way. At the 5-day master's class, when they arrived the first day, we said, okay, we want a 4-ingredient cocktail, including the garnish, that's new, assertive, and high degree of deliciousness.
Right.
Work on it 2 weeks and present it at the test on Friday.
Yeah. That's
It
the,
forced them
yeah,
to work with strong flavors in small.
in small capacity.
Yeah.
I definitely think the cocktail culture is going towards that 3 to 4 ingredient, just banger cocktails that you can make taste delicious. I
Well,
think,
less is more.
yeah.
I tell
Yeah,
people
yeah.
it's like one of the analogies I use is like it's like looking at the ingredient list of a 1-a-day vitamin.
Mhm.
There's this big laundry list. None of that stuff is there in any concentration that's going to help you.
Yeah.
But it looks really good, on paper. And sometimes I get people that they want to do something impressive and have all these ingredients that go together. Basically, it loses focus.
Right.
And it becomes just a mishmash. And would you drink it a second time? Probably not.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of the things that we're sort of leaving out of the equation in this discussion about education, about the change in my industry from the last millennium to the new millennium. I love that. I love that we lived over in the millennium.
Yeah,
I keep
like-
telling bartenders,
Yeah.
think about this. There's only 10 groups of human beings over the last 10,000 years that lived over a millennium. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so over the millennium, leading up to the millennium, it started happening that big drinks companies who used to spend millions of dollars on print ads and eventually on air when the cable became a big deal,
Mhm.
they could put a lot of advertising on television. And suddenly, and I think some of it had to do with some of the things that were happening in the 90s, at places like the Rain Room and other places as well, where they saw, as Jeannie Mo said, is the cocktail really coming back? And the question came to me a lot during the 90s. What I would say, go to the Libby catalog and look up glasses that are cocktail glasses. Not martinis, just look cocktail glasses. Well, in the early days in the 90s, I mean, in the early 90s and in the 80s, they had like 6 selections of cocktail glasses.
Yeah.
They were up to like, in the mid to late 90s, like 200 selections of cocktail glasses. I said, maybe that'll give you a little hint what's going on.
Yeah.
But the other thing was that the big drinks companies and even some of the smaller ones were willing to put a lot of those dollars into the trade, not into print ads or not into... And because of that, things like Tales of the Cocktail, BCB, San Antonio Cocktail, that thing, all around the world started happening. And a lot of it was the dollars that were pumped in. So they couldn't, in many cases in this country where alcohol beverages were regulated state by state, there are lots of states where you're not allowed to create unfair advantages for one customer over another by giving special pricing or this or that. So it's against the law to do that stuff. But the one thing that's not ever against the law anywhere in this country or probably everywhere else is to underwrite education in some way or to do something for charity.
Yeah.
So what happened was they saw the move toward premium. We saw it. I saw it. I had 3 malt scotches in 1974 behind the bar at Charlie O's. Lefroy,
Glenlivet,
Glenfiddich.
Big 3, yeah.
I can name it.
Yeah. There
Same
was one
here.
other one
Okay,
that
yeah.
rose up once in a while, Bunhaben. But other than that, most of them were in blends. But by the end of that decade, there were hundreds. And by the way, we got into the new millennium. By the way, when I made my first menu in 1987, I had that primo margarita, baby, Cuervo Gold.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, the Cuervos.
Right?
That's right.
And then I thought it was gas, but he swears to God he didn't do it. I went to a blue agave tasting like 1992,
Right. Mhm.
and they're like 7, and
This is confusing.
I found the Cuervo right away.
Yeah.
I said, well, this is the tequila. I don't know what these things
They
are.
are. Right.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was me because I'd never tasted tequila,
Mhm.
and all of us hadn't, So now we have drinks companies that are willing to educate bartenders in exactly that. Not only that, they see the premiumization of the industry. So when you crossed over the millennium, the geometric explosion in every category.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, when I wrote the first craft of the cocktail, 2002, I did not brand those drinks unless it was Cointreau or chartreuse or whatever, something that you really needed to have. I'd say use your favorite gin, use your favorite. Now in the 2020 craft of the cocktail, I branded everything because I could pinpoint exactly the whiskey, exactly the gin, exactly the flavor I wanted for that particular cocktail.
Yeah.
I would never use Hendrix in a martini except for the Orbium, which they just came out with.
Yeah.
But I would use it in this cocktail over here because it has such an interesting, different than any gin I'd ever tasted before. So there was a possibility. You look at Death & Co.'s, they brand everything at Death & Co. You know, everybody brands everything now. And if you had done that back in the 90s, they would have said, hey, you got bought out by the
Right,
took
right,
a lot of
yeah.
money from this brand and that brand.
Right.
No, but so that's a big change, and the palate has exploded for the bartender. You know,
I think the palate and even our consumers nowadays too are very, very educated on and they know what they like. It's definitely good points.
Another analogy
Yeah,
Dale makes often is basically this all follows in the food revolution.
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah.
You know, so much came. You know, it's the evolution of like classic French cuisine and Asian and whatever, and brought forth all these fusions, which was basically a 1990s phenomenon.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And and
We wouldn't have a craft cocktail movement
without the food revolution.
culinary explosion.
Yeah.
They created our audience.
Mhm.
End of story. People
Yeah.
willing to try anything and in love with big flavor.
Yeah.
You know.
That is very true. The food and drink have always had a symbiotic relationship, and you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, I always got a steak if I gave the guys at the kitchen something really nice.
Yeah.
Very symbiotic.
Giving them the drinks and they give you some food.
That was the old-fashioned
Yeah.
style.
Yeah, I get you.
When I got into this business, and before that time, it's kind of like you talked about the emergence of tequilas that were very finely flavored, and very very mixable, and then all these vodkas appeared also in the 90s, and that went into the early 2000s. When I got into this commercially, the world was awash in vodka and flavored vodka in the U.S. It was so much, so much vodka.
Yeah.
Right, and very mild things. And now we're seeing a progression, thank goodness, long overdue, toward more strongly flavored spirits.
Yes.
When we launched Lucid Absinthe in 2007, it was all about vodka and flavored vodka. I mean, stuff was everywhere, and and I didn't get it, but here I was like swimming uphill with a strongly flavored spirit, and now that's changing, and it's a landmark to see that agave spirits have eclipsed vodka in case volume. Great, we want to see that. And that's one thing I've noticed spending a lot of time in Europe versus North America, is how much more accustomed Europeans are to strongly flavored spirits.
Yeah.
Agave is also very popular. Mezcal's very popular in Europe now. Italians are definitely, I would have to say, on the leading edge of, their palates are really accustomed to just about anything that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when I made my first menu at the Rainbow Room, I put the Negroni and the Americano on that menu. 6 months later, I took the Negroni off. I didn't take the Americano off, but I didn't understand the Negroni. I had a book that I used for my first Rainbow Room menu called Bottoms Up, 1951, first edition.
Okay.
It was a trip around the world, giving a snapshot of the middle of the 20th century of what the top bars and clubs around the world were serving. And the Negroni was in there, equal parts, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand because it didn't give a lot of information about the drink, how you serve it, the thing. I didn't understand the drink, so I stirred it and I poured it up in a martini glass. Now, Americans don't like bitter things at that point anyway.
Yeah.
And so everybody would taste it. And as the drink got warmer, it got more and more
Worse.
bitter.
Yeah.
It was just
You
getting
know,
bitter
and then
and
I finally found out 5 years later, that in Firenze they serve it in a great big glass with a lot of ice cubes and a
bitter.
slice of
Spice,
orange.
yeah. Mhm.
And the Italians understood bitter aperitivos. They understood that that dilution creates wonderful blendings of flavor and opens up aromas, and the bitterness is receding instead of increasing. And so once I understood that, I put it back on the menu. By the way, the Americano was fine because it's vermouth, Campari, and a long drink,
Yeah.
with soda and
With
stuff.
some lengthener.
And it's well, we'll get to talking about these two products over here in a minute.
Yeah, that parlays into this.
Yeah.
But give the Italians credit; they've really mastered Italian mixology. Has really mastered the art of making bitter, work in a harmonious, such a way that, I mean, it's there's a lot of beauty in that.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely a lot of house amaros that are produced out in Italy.
Right,
So,
and
yeah,
have
they-
you noticed in the past few years how many have popped up
Mhm.
in the U.S. as compared to maybe 10 years ago,
Yeah.
10, 12 years ago?
Yeah.
So once again, that's something that Dale and I took note of, and Dale and I tell the story. It was in 2010 at Atlanta Food and Wine when we first really sat down and had a good conversation. And Dale was complaining rhetorically that back in his days at the Rainbow Room there was this pimento dram made by Ray and Nephew.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it was quite uncommon. I think there were 2 people in the country pouring it. Like Dale was one, and somebody else in San Francisco.
Okay.
And stuff that had this, this strong allspice and clove. And Dale evidently used it like a lot like bitters in cocktails, and was complaining there was nothing that had that flavor profile.
Yeah.
And so we collaborated and created DeGroff bitters.
Yes, that's one of my favorites to mess with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
And and then fast forward to the COVID lockdowns, and we both do a lot of travel, but we were both not traveling. And so we started talking, and Dale said, "Look, Angostura Amaro, which was a brilliant idea. Surely Angostura knows that bartenders everywhere were doing shots of, and how can we legitimize this, and make it work? I mean, when I was bartending, it's like, bottle of Angostura bitters, like, what's this horrible tasting stuff in a small bottle? But, people like this flavor profile. We thought that what they did making an Amaro from it was brilliant. And it was Dale's idea to say, hey, can we make an Amaro from our cocktail bitters?
Yeah.
It's like,
I just put a little 2-to-1 Demerara sugar syrup in it first into the Amaro. And I tasted it, and I immediately called Ted. I said, Ted, make a little Demerara sugar syrup and put it in. I know it's just beginning, but I think we got something here, and we're going to have to go a lot farther than that. But this is a good indication that there is pay dirt here.
Yeah,
for sure.
And Dale thinks in flavors. I think we need something that's kind of like this fruity to round off, but kind of a. And I'm like, oh, we need a base note, a bass line. I think in music. It's weird. I equate flavors with musical notes.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's like, okay, and then we went back and forth, and finally we had something that was, we thought was quite nice. And then. And that was done, but the Amaro is like one bookend, and you kind of need the other, which, we both agreed that there was space in the market for something that was classic Italian ingredients and construction, and production, with no artificial, no colors, nothing, like something that really was, like 120-year-old type.
True to form.
Exactly. Without the constraints of something, having to make 500,000 cases a year or something. That's not, we don't have to worry about that. We can do what we want to do. We don't have to be so concerned about costs and consistency and things like, well, we're concerned about consistency, but so that from that, and I spent a lot of time reading some antique Italian books.
Okay.
And and then we came up with the DeGroff bitter aperitivo.
Okay.
So we've completed the before and the after.
Yeah.
With that, and then I had a good relationship with Hood River.
Okay.
And Clear Creek, one of the original American craft distilleries. One of the original 3 from the 1980s, and they liked the idea, and we all got together and liked the vibes, and everybody was on board. So I roped them into this, and Dale and I, got put this whole thing together, and
that's what
I don't think anybody really. I think everybody thought that Negroni pretty much owned this space. I mean, the Campari pretty much owned this space.
Yeah.
And we don't think they do necessarily own it. There's room for a little. We're not going to take over the market. I mean, we just want a little.
Little slice.
Yeah, for sure.
Just a bit.
Yeah. And I think you guys kind of hit it on the mark there, because a lot of the consumers nowadays want something that doesn't skip steps. I'm not saying they do, but like having additives and stuff in spirits is definitely something that a lot of brands are doing. And I think staying true to form is very important.
Yeah, I will never diss Campari, by the way, because I worked for them. I still like Campari. I use it, but it's a bit of a bully in a drink. If you want to taste Campari, it's going to show up in an aggressive way no matter what, you know. And if you like that flavor, dynamite, But you notice that nobody uses a 1-1-1 Negroni
Negroni.
anymore
Yeah, they're using
because of the
this-
Campari.
Yeah,
So they
using
go
the stair
2,
steps.
3/4, 3/4,
Yeah.
or 1.5, 3/4, 3/4. You know.
Yeah. I'm a traditionalist. I love the 111
Me too.
Campari, so it's one of my favorites.
Me too.
So,
Well, when you use 111 with the DeGroff, it's very well balanced. Yeah. Yeah, we were making some mezcal Negronis yesterday, which were...
okay.
And it's all
Yeah.
cloudy. Notice
Yeah, I was gonna say it definitely has.
he's
the
allergic to filtering
I do
spirits.
not, I'm not a fan of the whole chill filtration, which is
Yes.
a relatively recent, in the grand scheme of things, invention. And no, I'm not a fan. I know how it destroys absinthe, and which it does, and it definitely affects other spirits for the benefit of having the liquid look nice and crystal clear in the bottle. Don't really care about that. You know, gentle filtration.
It's like a gentle filtration. It looks like.
Yeah.
And when you put it
Yeah.
over ice and with another 2 spirits, it's just as nice looking as any other. You know, it doesn't get cloudy in that setting. You know, because it's pretty much mixed with other spirits, spritzes, whatever. You know,
Yeah.
and it's a good looking drink. It doesn't have that sort of bright red look. You know, that Select has and Campari has and
no fire
Aperol
engines.
has.
No fire engines.
Yeah.
For sure.
But speaking of that, it's interesting to talk. When we're teaching this to the USBG or other groups of bartenders, it's good to give them a little perspective about the facts and in the emergence of this whole. Because we were a country that was kind of had an aversion to bitter, and in 2002, Grupo Campari bought Aperol. 2006, they brought it here. It didn't immediately jump up, but it did start to grow pretty quickly. And coinciding with that, they were buying shares of a little company called Sky Spirits, Grupo Campari. And by 2012, they had a commanding ownership in that company, and they moved it to New York and called it Campari America.
Yeah.
And they had that same portfolio. It was very nice, and they had a vision, and that vision went all the way back to when they bought Aperol. And the vision was that they were going to take over the American cocktail hour with 2 drinks, the Spritz and the Negroni.
Yeah.
And I say they kicked ass. I mean, they really.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a bar in America that doesn't make a Spritz now.
Yep.
And the Negroni has its own week.
Yes.
You know.
And then the whole aperitif hours too is
Yeah.
also a big deal here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
it
what
was
I've been
an
seeing.
extraordinary
Yeah.
thing that Grupo Campari did, and I salute them. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give
We
them
want to
credit for
glom onto
opening
their
that door.
success.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
but it helps everything, and
Yeah.
it's actually helped catalyze a mini renaissance in absinthe.
Mhm.
Now with the new
Totally.
generation that's coming
Yeah.
in, which is great. You know, it's like great. You know, strongly flavored spirit and a trend where strongly flavored spirits are on. You know,
Yeah.
are fashionable.
Yeah, for
Great,
sure.
that's what we want. Yeah, but it helps us as Americans. We need it.
Yeah, for sure. So the aperitivo. So if you guys want to kind of walk us through these 2 products, I'm definitely intrigued because the first time I have not tried them yet, so I'm kind of curious on your process.
Shall we pour?
Yeah, we sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, pour a little bit.
yeah. Let's do it. Here, help yourself.
Yeah, perfect.
You want to taste it?
Oh, sure.
I'll hold off on this one and go to the next one.
Yeah, just touch me. Thank you.
And you can see that it looks cloudy in the bottle, but in the glass,
Yeah.
it's got a good look.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Classic Italian.
Yeah,
botanicals.
for sure.
Completes all botanical. Everything about it is completely botanical.
Let me stick my nose in.
Yeah, you'll get the classic. You'll get various citrus. You'll get gentian root. You'll get rhubarb. You'll get other botanicals in it.
We've got sassafras from our group.
Okay.
We've gotten fig from our group.
Mhm.
This you can't say no to those things. You know.
That's really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really
The and this is this is the last of batch 1 because this is all botanical, and give big props to Caitlin Bartlemay of Clear Creek, who's been amazing at taking something that's when you have something that's all botanical construction and you scale it up. It's
I'm sure it's
there's
chemicals and
always going to
stuff.
be some mysterious variations, right? But yeah. So actually, it's we've made one tweak The newest one is a little bit more intense and a little sweeter, but you taste you get that classic, this is the classic strictly botanical flavor profile.
Okay. And this one what's the base spirit on this one?
Oh, it's
just
grain neutral.
Grain neutral.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's GNS. Yeah.
Perfect. And is it maceration of each individual ingredient, and then you're combining them, or are you doing it in one big batch?
It's a little bit of a process.
Okay.
A little bit of a process, Patrick, and
You ain't telling me.
Yeah, no, this is probably one of the secrets. I'm just
a little bit cagey, but
I got you.
But but they've had to get some equipment to make this work.
Okay.
And it's definitely a big change for a distillery that distills fruit brandies and whiskeys and things like that. So this was a big change for them.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah,
This is definitely delicious.
It was interesting when we moved our cocktail aromatic bitters to left France and moved into Sazerac. Gazes, orange bitters is made there. And they were kind of embracing the bitters world at the time because they had bought Gaz's idea. He didn't really own it anymore, although he got a little taste for every bottle. And they bought a company in New Orleans. Was it Bittermans in New Orleans? Yeah.
Yes.
So they made a distinct. We didn't sell them, by the way, our bitters. We just contracted them to make it, which put us at a bit of a disadvantage because we're not high on their list of priorities.
Yeah.
And they also, as he said, we're not used to making this kind of thing. When I went to Saumur and went to Combier, and I was greeted, it was a good timing, because we're just doing some work on the bitters right now. And he took me in the back room, and there was a guy with a giant oar in a great big vat of 50 gallons minimum.
Okay.
And I said, well, what's he up to? He said, well, we like to move the botanicals around, periodically, and that's what he's doing today.
Yeah.
So I said, cool. And I went over to smell, And I don't know if in the beginning when we first went to Sazerac, if they were going to that extreme, but I noticed that I noticed a little lighter color in it, but then it's starting to go back, to the darker color. They're making a decent version of it, and I think it's getting better as they kind of get used to what we're doing, and what Gaz is doing, and what Bittermans is doing. They're starting to understand the idea of these aromatic bitters, and it's something they don't do in their distillery.
Yeah. Well, when you work with whole botanicals, it's a different ballgame.
Yeah. Say that this and chartreuse and anything that's using botanicals, it's always intriguing talking about it, like how, like you're saying, when you're scaling.
Oh, absolutely.
How much variation you can get
Yeah.
in a batch.
Yes. Yeah.
So, this is great. I want an Americano with this.
It's a goodie. And by the way, it makes a Waka Negroni, an Old Pal, a Boulevard Day. They all work 1-1-1. They work very well.
It's definitely
it stands up to the whiskey. It stands up to the mezcal. It's good.
And how long was this project in progress?
Well, the Amaro, we started talking about almost the first year we made the bitters and said, one of these days we might make something in ounces that we can sell.
Yeah.
The idea goes back. It's just that we didn't really get time to develop it until around the COVID lockdowns, when we were captive audiences.
And you're able to sit down and just kind of
Right. And I dusted off my I've got a lot of 19th century pharmaceutical making equipment. So, boom. Got all that cranked up and was making, Fernet and various things and got in the groove and that's when we started, coming up with samples and finding out what worked and what we liked and what we didn't.
Yeah, for sure. So you have a little lab at home that you play with? That you do stuff
it's like a 19th century commercial, pharmacy. Drug compounding pharmacy. Yeah, I've got all the equipment. Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah,
I hope the local police understand what you're doing.
I'm sure.
Yeah, they would be very confused. But yeah, I mean, my main, the thing is when I'm in my sort of introverted, introspective, mode at home, I'm like an ethnobotanist. So that's been, absinthe started my deep dive into botanicals and all the differences and variations within a single species of something and what that means from a organoleptic standpoint. So that's been that is my perpetual deep dive. Nerdism never reach a finish line because there isn't one.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I looked at so far at home to this point, I've either cultivated or attempted to cultivate more than 650 different species of ethnobotanical plants.
Okay.
So this has been a real hobby,
That's awesome.
but that helps my understanding.
Yeah.
Which, you know,
You should write
Yeah,
the
the
book.
passion.
And there was a woman named Amy Stewart, who we all know, wrote
Yeah.
the book called Drunken Botanist. And
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to Amy, but also to say to a lot of bartenders out there that she has come out with her second edition of the Drunken Botanist. I think is worth the because she's come a long way.
Okay.
And you should write the book too. The book.
So you-
yeah. What would I name it? Ted's musings.
I don't know, but
that'd be a
do
fun
it in the
episode.
style of the Oxford
Ted's
Companion.
brain fog.
Spirits and cocktails. Only you could make it botanicals and spirits.
I can finally do that cocktail book about old-fashioned garnish with deadly nightshade. They're quite delicious. Just don't eat them.
Just don't eat them.
Yeah. Okay, so it
Well,
looks like
that's
we're moving on to the
Yeah.
Amaro.
Let's talk about Amaros.
Yeah, rooted the flavor profile. This is, to give Angostura props. We love what they did, and this is what we did with DeGroff bitters. And you'll notice that it says DeGroff New World Amaro,
I see that.
because unlike the aperitivo, we're not pretending to be a small village Amaro, from Italy or anything like that. This is very much a new world expression and a flavor profile. Well, those are for you. And yeah, so it's a new world expression of a very old theme.
Okay.
Maybe you saw my ancient family crest at the top there,
Yes,
which
it
is
says out there.
18,
Okay.
18 months
Yeah.
old.
Yeah. I love it.
Right, with the bar spoons,
The bar
and
spoons
the
and
sugar
the
all
jigger,
that.
yeah.
Yes, the DeGroff family crest.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
exactly.
Awesome.
The coat of arms.
So, this smells so good.
It's good.
Yeah.
There's a fruit in there. If you swish it around, that jumps out of the glass. Obviously, the baking spices, and the allspice, and all that are very, very
Yeah,
apparent. But
big allspice
hiding
and
underneath,
cloves.
there's a fruit.
I smell like a ripe pear.
Hey, you're gonna find pear in a lot of spirits because it's one
yeah.
of the deals,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's real good.
Well, we
Oh,
use
the bitters.
sour cherries from the Northwest.
The
Yeah,
cherries.
some bitter.
You find it
bitter
now,
is
right?
cherries.
Yes, bitter
Yeah,
cherry.
yeah.
But if you think about it,
Okay.
one thing that I can't help because I love tiki drinks is a painkiller, Mai Tai, pina colada with a splash of this. The word I use, it just makes it holographic. Really,
It does really.
It really does.
He says holographic. I think it's like a shot of bolt of lightning through the drink.
Lightning. A bolt of lightning. Okay.
Yes, very complimentary. Yeah,
That's real good.
and it has a long
Yeah.
finish.
I mean, a little bit poured over vanilla ice cream ain't a bad idea
Oh, yeah.
either.
Oh, yeah. Or like affogato with a little bit of espresso in this.
There you go.
There
And
you
Dale
go.
makes a midnight Manhattan with it.
Yeah. Half
it's the
ounce.
same.
And I eschew the bitters, and I use a half ounce of this instead.
Mhm.
And a good Italian. I use Cochi Vermouth Victorino mostly.
Yep.
I like the chocolate notes, and then a good rye or bourbon, whatever your choice is.
Yeah, it's a good name for it, Midnight Manhattan.
And Midnight Manhattan is really, that's great.
And that color, it's completely natural. Looks like used motor oil. It's great.
Yeah.
I love that. We
Yeah.
try to mention that at least once. So-
Love that
Oh,
color.
cherries. That's awesome.
and enjoy that used motor oil look of the.
Oh, use motor oil. Yeah. This is really good. Awesome.
Thank you.
And what states is this available in right now? I think you guys are slowly
New York,
rolling
New
it out.
Jersey, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and Texas. And
Okay,
Texas and
Now Texas.
California.
And Texas.
Freshly Texas,
We're in
yes.
California also.
California.
Yeah,
Cool.
we haven't done an official launch in California, but it's there, and yeah, so it's been a slow rollout because scaling up and working with botanicals and obtaining consistency and the exact balance that we wanted. It's a real challenge. That's why people don't like to do it. It's a real challenge, and also with the Amaro, we've noticed that, especially with batch one, that it evolves in the bottle.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to change.
Yeah.
And by the way, outside of the trade, if you just want to buy it online, it's in 42 states online. If you
Okay.
go to our website, DeGroff Spirits or Hood River.
Okay. That's
Hood River
so
Distillery.
good. I love the bitters, and it's great.
Well, glad you like it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's fun. Took a
Yeah.
sample to some of my Italian bartender friends in London, just to see what they think. It's really fun to introduce Italians to this.
To this tomorrow.
Yeah, it's like it's like a total whoa, wow. Okay, let me process this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Amaro, but it's not like any Amaro I know.
Mhm.
No, they're not. They're not thinking about allspice because allspice is a new world.
Yeah, new
Right.
world.
Mhm.
It's like, wow, it's crazy. When can I get it?
So this is a blend of the bitters and then kind of the pimento dram idea.
Yeah,
And then coming into
In a sense,
cohesion
those
more
are
to
the.
Amaro.
This is the result of a marriage like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
with the fruit element added in.
Yeah.
to give it some dimension
Yeah.
when it's stretched to something that you
Mm.
can drink. Some complementary dimension that complementary flavors. Like we just had, like I said, we had to find those musical notes that make music instead of just
Yeah.
sounds.
Yeah, for
Our
sure.
bitters was so intensely bitter, more than any other one in the market, I think, that I made a point of saying, don't taste it, but put it on the palm of your hand, rub it
Just
around, and smell it. That's what's going to happen in your glass. But if you taste it, it's so bitter, it doesn't translate on the tongue,
This is real good. Definitely a lot of depth. That's what I can say working well.
Yeah,
And
well, that was
replacement of dram, yeah.
that was the
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
That's we had to give it some depth.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
a lot of Amaras are a little fruity, sweety, and I think your comment and Ted's comment about the base notes, are appropriate. It does have, some intensity. Actually, our first batch had a little too much intensity.
Yeah,
so we toned it
okay,
down.
Okay.
It was a little anesthetizing.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
We didn't want to numb everyone like
Yeah.
they'd been,
I mean, there were a couple old Italians who liked it and some geeky bartenders in Portland, but we thought we better get a better audience.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it's
that's
kind of hard to have
Bigger audience.
chew on Sichuan pepper before going to dinner kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Awesome.
took some tweaking and working, but that's the beauty of it.
It's always a work in progress.
Yes,
like you said, like
exactly.
always learning and changing and growing.
And we got a wonderful designer named Steve Sandstrom to do this beautiful label.
It's
Mhm.
very
And
nice.
a
very
shout out
clean.
to him because he did such an amazing job.
Hey, did packaging like Bullet, Aviation Gin.
Okay.
Deco look. And,
Yeah.
and
Very
we
Art
we
Deco.
were disagreeing over whether it should be a round bottle or square
I
bottle.
wanted a
so he-
square bottle.
he
You
gave us
wanted
both.
round. We got both.
Okay, yeah, both. Yeah, it was best world. Well, you got the square bottom and then round top.
That's it.
There you go.
So,
It's Bormioli, by the way.
Okay.
Italian glass.
I was gonna say it looks really nice.
yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we talked a little bit about the Amaro. Why don't we jump into absinthe?
Oh yes.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
We can talk about this for a little while too.
Yeah.
So, absinthe, what is it? I know there's a different categories. I know what absinthe is, but for people who are listening and watching,
Right.
can you give us like a
Right.
101?
Well, I mean, one bit of context I always point out: if you go through old publications and you look at ads for like Angostura bitters and Fernet Branca from like 1900, they always have claims of having curative properties. One word that comes up a lot is dyspepsia, stomach aches, But basically, those were all rooted in the panacea of the 1800s, which were botanical bitters, and there were loads of them. And basically, absinthe was created to be a medicinal drink, and it was created to be a medicine that would not be so palatable if it weren't for borrowing from an ancient Mediterranean theme of taking distilled wine, brandy, which doesn't go bad, unlike wine, and redistilling it with anise and fennel seeds. And basically, this was borrowing from that theme, distilling that with Grand Absinthe, Artemisia absinthium, making it palatable, and then adding more medicinal botanicals to give it more flavor. And coincidentally, that's where the color is derived. And basically, understanding absinthe is a bit like understanding gin. If one understands the basic process for gin, absinthe follows that. The difference is absinthe has the traditional addition of a coloring step, which accounts for a lot of the benefits and the potential pitfalls. Absinthe was the big mistake that the French army made was when the French army was in Algeria around 1840, and they were having a lot of problems with dysentery because of unclean water. All the soldiers got rations of absinthe because it was said that if you put add some absinthe to water, it made it hygienic enough to, so it wouldn't cause you any problems. But that was soon bastardized into, instead of adding a little absinthe to water, it was a little water to absinthe. And the French military basically are credited with distributing the taste for absinthe around the country. And the interesting thing is, absinthe was around. It was mostly regional before that time. And the earliest record we find of an importer of French goods in New Orleans advertising absinthe, listing it in the French liquors that they were bringing over, is 1839. So it was exported pretty early on. And as that got to be more popular, that increased. And basically, it became so damn popular. And at that time, the column still was beginning to emerge. And traditionally, absinthe was made using wine spirit, as jades do. And at that time, when phylloxera hit Europe, ravaged the vineyards of Europe, and wine and brandy and anything made from grapes became relatively scarce and expensive and out of the reach of commoners, for a good part, well, absinthe stepped in and filled that void. And in doing so, created some real some economic antagonists, some real opposition from the wine and the brandy makers, who were seeing their market share go to the national drink, which was absinthe. And as a result of that, that's when the politics jumps in. And a lot of people may know that in the mid-1700s, there was a big problem in London called the gin craze. And Hogarth makes his, drawing Gin Lane, Beer Alley, and gin was nicknamed Mother's Ruin. Is that because gin is poisonous? No. But if it's made improperly by profiteers, who are primarily selling their cheap adulterated product to poor alcoholics, then it's a problem. And it created big problems in London back then. So much we know about it today. And basically the exact same situation repeated itself in France more than a century later with absinthe, without the benefit of any sort of regulation. You could put anything in a bottle and call it absinthe, and unscrupulous types did. And these problems caused all sorts of debates in France, and that raged on for decades. And the weird thing is, the more controversial it became, the more popular it became. Funny how that works. Here in the U.S., though, we weren't having those problems, despite absinthe being popular. Absinthe was an indelible part of American cocktail culture. One really good description is C.F. Lawler in his book, The Mixicologist, published Cincinnati in 1895. He says many people feel that that a small addition of absinthe to a cocktail fetches out the flavor. Basically, it's like cocktail hot sauce. The way I describe it. A lot used in American culture. In places like New Orleans, it was poured the continental way. Little ice water, maybe, the addition of sugar if, people had a sweet tooth. But absinthe was everywhere. We know it was out in the Pacific Northwest by 1900. I mean, I'm talking, logging towns, bars got absinthe on it. It was exported worldwide. But the thing is that people in the U.S. weren't having the problems that they were in France, because the products that were causing all the trouble weren't exported. So it was after a lot of really intense debate that finally when absinthe was banned in Switzerland in 1910, that was a huge blow, because almost all the world's absinthe came from a very sleepy region
there in Switzerland,
along the Franco-Swiss border. Yeah, in fact, the French annual absinthe festival, the Absinthiades, is held in a town called Pontarlier, which around 1900 had a population of 10,000 people, and today has a population of about 10,000 people. Not much changes there. But the thing is, in 1900, it was home to 21 absinthe distilleries. So, and
that's a lot.
Yes.
That's
but the
great.
thing is, that was the focus of production. Wine in France is made everywhere. So they were clearly at a political disadvantage. And when absinthe was finally banned, when the ban was passed in France in 1914, at the onset, around the onset of the First World War, that was the end, effectively, really. I mean, that, with the exception of a little bit that was produced in Spain under license, I mean, it was it basically disappeared.
Just died out.
It did.
Yeah.
And then we had this wonderful experiment here called Prohibition. And then when that was repealed, you had this whole, Savoy cocktail book, 1930.
Yeah.
Many, many, many cocktails called from. You had all these cocktails that you could make.
Yeah,
You didn't have anything with a flavor profile.
Yeah.
And anise liqueur and anisette and these industrial, they're not the same. So it doesn't work.
Are there any absinthe houses that have come back from that, or is it all just new absinthe houses? Are there any?
Well,
Is it-
aside from the old Absinthe House, which is still in operation, and aside from being officially shuttered during Prohibition, there are absinthe bars that have popped up.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, even some, like, for example, Breckenridge, Colorado. It's like the Swiss Chalet type bar. It's an absinthe bar. So, and it's a lot of fun, especially, 9,000 feet altitude, and you're drinking, 120 plus proof absinthe. Yeah, it's a lot of fun very quickly.
Yeah.
There's the one in
Is that-
Austin. What's it called? I keep forgetting the name of it. Where they
Oh.
have
Hesh?
yeah, they have the absinthe fountains on the bar.
Yeah,
Pesh does it too. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So I mean, it's they're I mean, you have an absinthe fountain at a bar definitely makes a statement. But for us, it's great to see absinthe return to cocktail culture. Because when I got into this, and especially when I started spending a lot of time in London, which is a big market, it was the perception that was horrible reputation of being this, like 70% alcohol, hooligan shot, flaming hooligan shot with, that was not where it needed to be.
Yeah.
And
I gotcha.
and to change all that once again was like swimming uphill. It took years of work and master classes and education and planting the right seeds with the right people in the right places and getting this whole thing reprogrammed.
Yeah.
And then stemming the tide of these disastrous products, making sure they didn't get a foothold here in this country.
Yeah.
Which is what that was our big issue with the TTB. They didn't want to see that happen either. Neither did we.
Yeah.
And fortunately, that's really helped the whole category because the more integrity in a category, the better it is for the world of craft cocktails
Yeah.
as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's been tough. My professional career derailed by absinthe.
Absinthe.
Yeah.
I got you. Well, this is really Lucid's one of my favorites, so I definitely have tried it before, but I definitely want to try it again.
Yeah. Well,
if we have to.
we
Yeah.
can open that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Can definitely open that. And everything we do, once again, the beauty of the Combier distillery is that it was designed, Gustav Eiffel was the architect, all the original equipment from the 1880s there. And for me, that was like, Captain Nemo finding the Nautilus.
Finally, okay.
Yeah, that was like walking back into a time capsule.
Here, you want to use these?
And,
Let me take a moment and apologize to Andrew Dornenberg, forgetting his name, one of the
Yeah,
co-authors
yeah,
of the
yeah,
Flavor
yeah,
Bible.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I got the old man memory here
I got you.
going away.
oh, those are, I don't know if you want to taste
I
them.
do.
Those are for you. Yeah, so distilled in the 140-year-old absinthe stills in a distillery that distilled absinthe until the ban.
Okay.
Using the same equipment, same methods, no automation, all done by hand.
So the proper absinthe service is sugar and cold water. What's the purpose for that?
That would be the continental service. Well,
Okay.
the thing is absinthe was always sold. I mean, when you look at old labels of absinthe, it always says extrait d'absinthe. Okay, so extract of absinthe. And basically, it has to be bottled at high proof because if it becomes cloudy in the bottle, it's no longer stable.
Okay.
Bottle of absinthe, I mean, will keep forever, and absinthe does age in the bottle. So it's a bit unusual in the world of spirits. It does oxidize a bit slowly over time, and it changes the flavor, and usually in a very pleasant way. But it's got to be bottled at high proof. Everything done by hand, never meant to be had straight.
Okay.
Continental, the very elegant but simple service. If you ordered an absinthe at a bar in Paris in 1900, what you got was a glass with a shot of liquor poured in it.
Okay.
the bartender's job was done. It was always up to the patron to finish the drink the way they wanted.
Okay.
Add as much water as they wanted. If they wanted sugar in it or not, it was always up to them.
Okay.
So having it in cocktails was a very American and then later Anglo-American sort of concept.
Mhm.
You know, in continental Europe, it was always like this.
Opalescent is such a beautiful word, and it so describes not only the jewel but the look of this.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, the nice luge.
And the perfume that comes off of it is something. You know, so basically when you had everyone knock off work and hit the cafes at 5 o'clock and have absinthe, I mean, you know, people wrote about the aromas, you know, emanating from the cafes and how pleasant it was when everybody was drinking absinthe.
Just absinthe.
Yeah.
It's real good. And the luge is from the oils, correct?
Yes,
Yeah, solution.
that's correct. Water upsets everything. Yep. Upsets the balance.
And if you were to take very cold water and dump it up about that high, a few minutes later you'd start to see little scales coming on top of that glass that look kind of nasty because all those botanicals all those molecules are breaking apart too quickly and they're all sticking together.
Yeah.
Coming to the top.
Yeah.
You know, hence the drip, drip, drip service,
Yeah.
you know. And I don't think good absinthe needs any sugar, in my opinion.
No.
So they created another way of serving it with the reservoirs,
Mhm.
which is either a glass reservoir sitting on top or maybe it was a pretty silver thing that had a little tick-tock
Yeah.
mechanism that would go back and forth as it dropped down.
Anything to get attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was for the
Part of the
wealthy.
show.
Yeah.
Anything to get attention.
But the sugar was unnecessary because a truly well-made absinthe has all the dimensions you need. You don't need
Yeah.
it. I think it was the poor products that probably needed to be
Yes.
sweetened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ones that
Sure.
the bohemian artists and poets usually stuck with. Paul Verlaine was notorious for whenever he was in a train that was pulling out of the station, and he was already drunk, no doubt, he would scream out the window, "I take it with sugar," yelling at the people on the platform. And, of course, everybody knew what he was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice.
And then you had the craft absinthe cocktail master Toulouse-Lautrec, he was a bit nuts, and he would layer like absinthe and chartreuse and vermouth. He would make these
Okay.
cocktails he called rainbow cups.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, and he would blend absinthe with cognac, and he called that a tremblement, an earthquake. Some brave people.
Yeah. So that and chartreuse right there's that's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very artistic.
Yeah. So you said this one's a jade absinthe. So what's the difference between jade and then this one here?
Well, so Lucid is interesting because a distillery, Combier distills Lucid, and then we put that into a massive container which treks across the ocean on a ship all the way through the Panama Canal and to the Pacific Northwest, where it's then blended with Hood River mountain water and bottled there.
Okay.
So that is the process for Lucid.
Okay.
Jade is a little bit different because Jade, like this is the first Jade absinthe I began distilling Combier in January of 2004, so a little over 20 years now.
Okay.
This is a bit different because this is all the stops pulled out, and it's more expensive. But the base spirit is a 19th century style eau de vie de vin. Very typical of what was used by the absinthe industry back in the day. Botanicals are privately cultivated. I've got to work with people in the original regions where those botanicals were grown in the 19th century to service the absinthe industry, which has changed because in those regions they don't necessarily grow those same botanicals anymore.
Yeah.
So it's the absolute best, most historically authentic botanicals, and every drop is distilled by me. You know, I'm the only one that knows how to do it. Yeah.
Okay.
And for example, Nouvelle Orleans here, the average age on this is about 3 years before bottling.
Okay.
Which back in the day was always done. I'm the only one that does that today, but it certainly makes a difference in the quality. So yeah, it's it's definitely personal art.
Okay.
And some of the other jades, like the Jade 1901 here, are actual painstaking replicas of original products that are original brands that are long gone.
Okay.
And when you taste them side by side, I analogize it. It's like tasting different red wines, like a Syrah versus a Cabernet Franc, versus a Pinot Noir. They're all red wine, but they all taste a little different.
Yeah. It's all that terroir and botanical influence that you have in there.
Exactly. So they're all a little bit different, and which I might use in what cocktails. If I have a choice, I may, pick one over the other.
Yeah.
So.
And as far as sourcing the botanicals, you had to go out and find a farmer to grow it for you?
This is a never-ending dance, because the people that I work with are individuals, and they are in some cases in other countries. And basically, I have to convince individuals, I have to guarantee that I'm going to buy what they grow and this sort of thing. And it never ends. So, and then we have some people retiring that are just no longer even being farmers. And so now I got to work with, their kids, and it never stops. It's just the cost. It's the price of doing this, which in modern times, is difficult to replicate what was normal in the 19th century. But, it's all spelled out. It's all out there. So, yeah, labor of love.
Yeah.
I'll be there in a week and a half.
Okay. How long do you do this distillation run?
I basically have run of the distillery for about a week at a time.
Okay.
And it's a lot of work. I run about 6 stills at a time. There's no automation, so you've got to be on top of everything. It's like this big ballet. And it's a lot of, to distill absinthe properly, you need equipment, you need loads of botanicals, you need energy, and you need time to do it, and lots of labor.
Yeah,
lots of labor, very laborious.
Do you get to sleep at all during that time, or you just pretty much
I just stick it out for a week, knowing that I'm going to have an aperitif, a big pecan beer. At the end of the day,
yes.
Ameripecan, shot of that, and 500 ml beer glass topped off with lager.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and I just take it one day at a time. But it's a load of fun. It's a lot of work. It really is, but it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it keeps me busy.
Yeah, I was gonna say it probably keeps it sounds really fun.
Have to keep it's kind of like Solera method, so I have to keep the aging tanks topped up.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for the absinthe education. And now kind of go and wrap it up here and go to conclusion. So I like ending the podcast with questions to you both, to our guests. So if you had one advice to tell yourself if you went back in time, what would you tell yourself when you're starting your career in this bar industry?
Man, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I don't think I make a lot of changes. I petered away a lot of time doing crazy things, and when I first got to New York, but those are the things that shaped who I am. I wouldn't change them. I did crazy jobs that, from dishwasher to chauffeur to putting up posters around town, moving man, but it all came together. And it brought me to different places in my life and introduced me to different people. I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't give myself that kind of advice. Listen more would be the only advice I would give myself, because I tended to be thinking about what I was going to say next instead of listening to the person I was with.
Yeah, I get you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about big changes. Maybe some tweaks.
Yeah.
There you go.
Maybe some tweaks, but I have to say, this was not my chosen career path.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up on this very bizarre detour. Smelled a lot of roses.
Mm-hmm.
It's I don't know. For me, this is it's been a labor of love, and it's so far it's remained in a good place.
Yeah.
So maybe outside of just a few minor course corrections, I think I think I'm kind of happy the way things worked out.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, if I could go back 30 years and fast forward to the present and see what I'll have, I think I would be
just keep the same course.
Pleasantly surprised, and pleased,
Awesome.
It's like, wow, this is a whole lot of fun. A lot more so is challenging as some of the challenges have been, and we've lived some of that.
Yeah.
Regulatory challenges. I mean, I'm the last producer in France to be charged and fined under the original absinthe ban of 1950
Okay,
by
okay.
technicality,
Okay.
which with the help of my friend Jared Gerfine and some legal, we got that fixed too. You know, it's like, and all these kinds of frustrations and challenges, and but in the end, the reward has been worth it. And I think if I could go back and fast forward till now, I think given a choice between maybe sitting in a lab under fluorescent lights all day, for the rest of my professional career, or having the opportunity to go places and meet people and do what I've done despite the challenges, I don't think I would change anything.
Okay. That's awesome. Very, very satisfying career so far.
So far,
That's
yeah.
awesome. Dale, since I have you in the studio, I got to ask you, what advice would you give to the younger generations of bartenders?
If you're working for somebody who doesn't share your vision of what you think hospitality is, what you think this business is, fire your boss and get another one.
You okay? Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, cool. Where can everybody follow you at on Instagram? Do you have any Instagram handles, any websites that you'd like to?
Well, DeGroff
to call it?
Spirits,
Raw Spirits,
Hood River. What's their
Hood River Distillers,
Hood River Distillers?
and for me, Jade Liqueurs on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah, those different places where you can find us.
Yeah, for sure. Perfect. Well, thank you, gentlemen.
I would say to the new generation is be patient.
Yeah.
This is a marathon.
Yeah.
It's not a sprint, and it's a very rewarding marathon.
Yeah, and I'll repeat Gaz's very important advice. You can't skip in between steps. You got to
Exactly.
learn.
To learn and do things.
And you can't jump ahead.
It
You
takes
may
time.
think that you're, but in the end, it's going to come around and bite you back because just when you need that bit of experience and knowledge, you're not going to have it.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
Yes, that's a journey.
Be patient.
It's a journey and be patient.
It's a rewarding journey.
Yeah, definitely right now in this industry, everybody's trying to make the name for it and make it happen quickly. Yeah, sometimes you just got to go with the flow. And
Be
I
patient.
wish that this has happened a little sooner in my life. I'm 75 now, so it's a little harder on my body
yeah.
running around promoting it. But other than that, I'm delighted.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for
Thank
joining
you,
us
Patrick.
today.
Been a pleasure.
Appreciate y'all. And y'all can catch us on the next episode